Hello, and welcome to Own Your Retirement. My name is Albert Lalonde from Kaizen Financial. If you'd like more information about what you hear during our show today, give us a call at 586-752-7008 or visit us online at www.kaizenfinancialinc.com. And while on my website, click on my podcast page to check out our past shows and also to subscribe to our program from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Okay, if you're married or have ever been married, there's this piece of the Social Security puzzle that often gets overlooked in retirement planning, and that's spousal benefits. Now, most people think of Social Security as something you earn based on your own work history, and that's true. But the rules also allow a spouse to receive benefits based on their partner's earnings record. And in some cases, that can make a real difference in what a household brings in during retirement. So, we're going to walk through how spousal benefits work, who qualifies, and how to think about building them into your retirement income strategy. Now, because for a lot of couples, this isn't just, let's say, a technicality. It can be a meaningful source of income they may not have fully factored in. And look, Social Security decisions aren't some of, the most permanent financial decisions you'll make. There's no do-over once you file. So my hope is that by the end of today's show, listeners feel informed and confident, whether they're planning for themselves, for a spouse, or for both. Now, before we get into the details, let me bring in my co-host, Tony Shore, who always knows just how to frame these conversations. Hey, Tony, how we doing, buddy?
Well, I'm doing great. I've had a good week, and I see you're still recovering there. You got your
Yes,
arm in a sling, and
yes.
for our viewers out there that can see us, you're having to take it easy. I know it's hard to give up the golf for a few months while you
Oh,
recover, but
summer, it's done. Not a
yeah,
few months. I wish it was a few months, but yeah,
uh,
no. I had to get my shoulder done. Old war battles from wrestling and working
sure.
out, and
Yep.
so it was needed, and I'm glad I did it. Technology and modern science has advanced from 30 years ago when I had this one done. Night and day difference. So I'm very pleased that with the procedure and the
Good.
progress. So we're getting along, just one hand at a time.
Good. Good. Well, you mentioned permanence, and that's
Hmm.
already sitting with me here on our topic today, Albert, because Social Security is one of these topics where a lot of people, I think, assume they'll just figure it out when the time comes, right?
Right.
They put it off, they don't think about it ahead of time. So I'm glad we're getting into some specifics today.
Mhm.
Where do you want to start with this?
Well, let's kick off the conversation. We're going to be using a discussion on the U.S. News and World Report article titled 2026 Guide How to Maximize Social Security with Spousal Benefits. So let's start with how spousal benefits actually interact with your own Social Security record, because this is where it gets a little, I would say, nuanced, and it's important to understand before you make any decision. So here's the way it works. If you're eligible for a retirement benefit based on your own earnings, the Social Security Administration is going to compare that amount to what you'd receive as a spouse. Now, they'll pay whichever is higher. If your own benefit is, let's say, larger of the two, that's what you'll receive. But if the spousal benefit would be greater, well, that's what kicks in instead. So, what that means practically is that the spousal benefit acts almost like a floor or a baseline that ensures a lower earning or non working spouse still has meaningful income in retirement. Now, here's the part I really want listeners to pay attention to. Timing matters enormously. If a spouse claims benefit before reaching, let's say, full retirement age, those benefits are permanently reduced, not temporarily, but permanently.
Yeah.
And that reduction follows you for the rest of your life. Now, ultimately, the decision, of when to file isn't just a calendar question. It's a financial strategy question. And it's one of the reasons I always encourage people not to make that call without really thinking it through or talking it through with a financial services professional.
Yeah, because you have a report you can run, that Social Security maximization report that'll show the
Yes.
spousal benefits. You want to talk to, do not file for Social Security without having that run. And I know that you run that for folks that schedule that no charge, no obligation consultation at no charge. So I think, and the word permanently that you use there is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Mhm.
Just to make sure I'm understanding, if a spouse files early, then takes that reduced benefit, there's no way to go back and correct it later, right?
That's exactly right, Tony. And it's one of those things that can really catch people off guard. Once you file, that's your benefit. Now, the Social Security Administration doesn't offer, let's say, a do over with very limited exceptions. In fact, there's an option to withdraw your application within the first 12 months of filing, but you'd have to repay every dollar you receive, which
Yeah.
isn't realistic for most people.
Yeah.
So, for many retirees, the age at which you claim is the age that sets your benefit for life. And that's why the timing conversation is so important to have well before you're actually ready to file.
Well, yeah, and I think that that extra detail is important to note right there. So
Mhm.
what's next? What else do we need to know here?
Well, let's put some real numbers to this so people can understand this. And I think it helps make the concept a little bit more tangible. So, if you wait until your full retirement age to claim your spousal benefit, you're going to be eligible to receive up to 50% of your spouse's primary insurance amount. Now, that's the maximum. Here's a simple example. If your spouse's benefit is $3,000 a month at their full retirement age, then your spousal benefit at your full retirement age would be $1,500 a month.
Yeah. And that's an easy calculation. I mean, $1,500 a month is nothing to overlook or sneeze at when you're trying to piece together solid retirement income with money you know will be there to help pay bills each month.
Exactly. And when you're building, let's say, out a full household income picture, that number can really matter. Now, if either spouse claims before full retirement age, that 50% ceiling comes down. The earlier you claim, the smaller the benefit. And as we touched on before, that reduction is permanent.
Wow. So, what does the landscape actually look like in terms of real dollar amounts today, then?
Good question. In fact, in 2026, the maximum Social Security retirement benefit at full retirement age is $4,152 a month. That sets the upper limit for what a spousal benefit could be based on. And after this year's cost of living adjustment of 2.8%, the average Social Security benefit for a retired married couple is $3,208 a month. So we're talking about real substantial income that's worth planning around carefully.
Yeah, I think that cost of living adjustment or COLA is a nice feature of Social Security that sometimes gets overlooked.
Mhm.
But let's talk about the full retirement age. I've heard you say that. I have a feeling that's a number a lot of listeners might not be sure about.
Yeah. In fact, that's a great point to flag because full retirement age isn't the same for everyone. It depends on the year you were born. Now, if you were born in 1960 or later, your full retirement age is 67. But if you were born before that, it might be slightly earlier. For example, if you were born in 1954, then your full retirement age is 66. For those born between 1955 and 1959, it phases up gradually in 2 month increments, landing somewhere between 66 and 2 months and 66 and 10 months, depending on your birth year. Now, the 1960 milestone marks the end of the gradual phase in that started with Social Security reforms back in 1983. Those reforms, signed into law by President Reagan, gradually raised the full retirement age from 65 to 67 over a multi decade phase in period as a way to account for longer life expectancies and also keep the Social Security program financially stable.
Yeah. So if I'm a listener and I'm not sure where I land, I'd want to look that up by my birth year.
Yes, bingo. And one more thing worth knowing, you don't have to claim at full retirement age. You can wait as late as age 70 and your benefit continues to grow the longer you hold off. If your health and finances allow for it, waiting can pay off in a big meaningful way.
Sure. Well, I love that you walked through that and some of the numbers there. I want to ask, can anyone who is married count on that 50% spousal benefit, or are there other factors that come into play
Yes,
here?
there are actually a few additional factors that can affect that amount. Your own earnings history plays a role. As we talked about earlier, if your own retirement benefit is higher than what you'd receive as a spouse, Social Security pays your benefit instead. Now, the spousal benefit really comes into play when one partner has a significantly lower or no earnings record of their own. Again, age is the other big variable. Claiming before your full retirement age reduces the benefit, and the reduction is calculated based on how many months early you file. So the 50% figure is really the ceiling, not a guaranteed number for everyone. And the amount any individual receives depends on their specific situation, which is why it's worth looking at your own numbers rather than assuming you'll land at the maximum.
Yeah. Well, and before we keep going with this conversation today, Albert, I want to take a minute here to let our listeners know that they can schedule a no charge consultation with you to ask questions or have that no cost, no obligation report run, the Social Security maximization report. How can they do that?
Yeah, folks, if you're interested in learning how to maximize your Social Security and your spouse's Social Security, just give us a call at 586-752-7008 or visit us online at www.kaizenfinancialinc.com. Remember, scheduling a consultation only takes a few minutes, and we're always here to help you own your retirement.
All right. Well, I know that this is an important topic. Let's keep moving. What do you have for us next?
Well, timing is really at the heart of this whole conversation. And before anyone makes a decision about when to claim, it's worth doing a genuine cost benefit analysis. That means looking at your full picture and not just the benefit amount itself, but also things like earnings limitations and how federal and potentially state income taxes might affect what you actually take home.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. The number on that paper isn't always the number in your pocket, right?
Absolutely. And one of the most important pieces of that analysis is understanding what claiming early actually cost you. Now, let's say if you file for spousal benefits before reaching full retirement age, your benefit is permanently reduced. Waiting until full retirement age means you receive the full spousal benefit, which again is up to 50% of what your spouse is eligible for.
Well, are there any other timing considerations beyond the age question?
There's actually a requirement that a lot of people don't know about until they're ready to file. In order to claim a spousal benefit, the person you're basing that claim on must already be receiving their own Social Security benefit. Your spouse has to have filed first.
Okay. What if your spouse hasn't filed yet?
Ah, in that case, your initial benefit will be based on your own earnings history, assuming you've accumulated the 40 credits needed to qualify for retirement benefits. Then, once your spouse does file, you have the ability to switch over to the spousal benefit if that amount is higher. So, for context, you earn credits by working and paying Social Security taxes. And in 2026, you earn one credit for every $1,730 in wages or self-employment income, up to a maximum of 4 credits per year. The way it works is that your payment becomes a combination of the two that adds up to the higher amount you qualify for.
Okay, that's a helpful detail right there, Albert. And I want to ask you about the higher earner in the household because I think that some people worry that their spouse collecting spousal benefits might somehow affect their own benefit, but it doesn't, does it?
It doesn't. And that's a really common concern that's worth clearing up. If you're the higher earner, the spousal benefit your partner receives is completely separate from your own and has no impact on your benefit whatsoever. The two are independent of each other, Tony.
Okay, so let's say somebody's been taking all this in and they're thinking, okay, I want to look into this for myself. What does the actual process of claiming a spousal benefit look like?
I think it's pretty straightforward process, but you do well, But put this way, but you do want to make sure that you have your documentation in order before you get started. You'll need to verify your eligibility, and that means providing things like your marriage certificate and both spouses' social security numbers.
So, are there any eligibility requirements that might catch people off guard then?
Yeah, one worth knowing is that you must have been married for at least 1 year before you can claim a spousal benefit. It's not something most people would need to worry about, but it is a requirement. Now, beyond that, the standard eligibility factors, well, we've already covered, and that's applied. That's including your age, your spouse's filing status, and whether your own benefit is lower than the spousal benefit amount.
Sure. Well, once somebody has their documents together, where do they actually go to apply?
You have a couple of options. You can contact the Social Security Administration directly to schedule an appointment, or you can apply online through their website. Either way, they'll review your application and make the determination on eligibility. Now, my general advice is don't wait until the last minute to start the process. In fact, give yourself some runway. Gather your documents ahead of time. And if you have any questions about how the benefit fits into your broader retirement plan, that's a great conversation to have with a financial professional before you file.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you've talked a lot about the timing of when to claim, but I want to make sure we cover something I think it does also catch people off guard, and that's what happens if someone claims early but is still working?
Mm. This is an important topic, and you're right that it surprises a lot of people. If you claim Social Security before your full retirement age and you're still earning income, your benefits could be temporarily reduced depending on how much you're earning. Now, it's called the earnings test, and it applies a withholding threshold based on your income. It's also worth noting that the earnings test applies specifically to wages and self employment income, which are things like investment returns, pension payments, or rental income, don't count toward that limit.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because I think that's significant. Walk us through what these thresholds actually look like then.
Yeah, for 2026, if you're under full retirement age for the entire year, you can earn up to $24,480 without any impact on your benefits. Now, that breaks down to about $2,040 a month. If you earn more than that, $1 is withheld for every $2 you go over the limit. Now, in the year you actually reach full retirement age, the rules loosen up quite a bit. The threshold jumps to $65,160 for that year, which is $5,430 a month, and the withholding rate drops to $1 for every $3 over the limit. And once you hit full retirement age, then there's no earnings limit at all. You can earn as much as you want without any impact on your benefits.
Hmm. I think that's a pretty significant jump between those thresholds. I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said this reduction is temporary, though.
Yes, that's the part that's really important to understand. And I'm glad you caught that. The withheld benefits aren't gone forever. Once you reach full retirement age, the Social Security Administration recalculates your benefits and gives you credit for the months when payments were withheld. So over time, you get that money back through a higher monthly benefit. It's not a penalty in the permanent sense, but it does affect your cash flow in the short term, which is why it's worth factoring in when you're deciding whether to claim early while still working.
Okay. Let's shift gears here a minute. I wanted to ask you about something on the tax side because there's that new development in 2026. We've mentioned it on the show before, but I think it's relevant for the people we've been talking about today in this topic. Walk us through the senior bonus deduction that's
Yeah.
available.
Well, this is a welcome change for a lot of retirees. As part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the sweeping tax legislation signed into law last year in 2025 that made several changes affecting retirees, including the introduction of this new deduction for older Americans. Now, there's a new $6,000 deduction available for taxpayers who are 65 and older. For single filers, that deduction is $6,000. For married couples filing jointly, it doubles to $12,000.
Hmm. Wow. Those are meaningful numbers. Are there income limits attached to
Of
this?
course, there are. This is the government we're
Sure,
talking about.
sure. Yeah.
To qualify, your modified adjusted gross income needs to be at or under $75,000 if you're a single filer, or $150,000 for married couples. Now, it's targeted toward retirees who are in that moderate income range, which is actually a large portion of the people who rely on Social Security as a primary income source.
Yeah. So how does this connect specifically to spousal benefits? It does,
Mm.
right?
It does. For married couples who are leaning on spousal benefits as part of their retirement income, this deduction could make a real difference. In fact, by reducing taxable income, it helps preserve more or what they're actually bringing in each month. Now, when you're working with a fixed income in retirement, every dollar matters. And a provision like this can help stretch that income further. In fact, it's one more reason why staying current on tax law changes is part of a good retirement planning, not just something to hand off to your accountant each year.
Yeah. Well, and I want to make sure we don't leave out a group of listeners who this topic is really relevant for, and that's people who are divorced.
Oh, yes.
There's some spousal benefits there, or ex-spousal benefits in this case.
Mhm.
How does that apply?
It's a great point to raise. And the answer is that divorce doesn't necessarily take spousal benefits off the table. Now, if you were married for at least 10 years before divorcing, have not remarried at least until 60, and are at least 62 years old, you may be eligible to receive up to 50% of your former spouse's Social Security benefit. And
Oh,
importantly, claiming that benefit has no impact on what your ex-spouses receives. That's the biggest key right there.
yeah, they're not even going to know about it. It doesn't
Correct.
affect their amount, but you're eligible for up to 50% in that instance. And I
Yes.
think this is something a lot of divorced people probably don't realize or take advantage of. Are there any nuances to the timing of when you can claim?
There are a couple worth knowing. If your ex-spouse is already receiving Social Security benefits and you're at least 62, you can claim right away. But if your ex-spouse hasn't filed yet, you can't. You can still receive benefits once you reach 62, as long as you've been divorced for at least 2 years. Then the 2-year mark is a threshold to be aware of in that situation.
Yeah, so you have to have been married for 10 and divorced for at
For
least 2.
two,
So what if
and be
somebody
62.
yeah, and be 62 years old. So what if somebody's already receiving their own Social Security benefit? Can they still factor in an ex-spouse's record?
They can. If you're already receiving the benefits and your ex-spouse's record would yield a higher amount, you'd receive whichever is greater. The same logic we discussed earlier for married couples also applies here as well.
Yeah, and I hate to even go here, but a question people might have is what happens if the former spouse passes away, your ex passes away?
Mhm. In that case, you could be eligible for the same benefit as a surviving spouse.
Ah, survival benefits.
Provided the marriage lasted at least 10 years. So even after a divorce, that 10-year threshold carries real weight. It's
Mhm.
one of those details that can have a significant financial impact, and it's worth knowing whether it applies to your situation.
Yeah. Well, what a great note to end on here. A lot of great information today. Is there anything else you want to add before we go?
Folks, if you have questions about retirement and your financial strategy, wondering when to take Social Security, how to make spousal Social Security work for your situation, please visit my website at www.kaizenfinancialinc.com, or call my office 586 752 7008. We love to help you build a financial strategy that has you looking ahead and have you own your retirement.
All right. Well, thanks, Albert. Great show today. Listeners and viewers, thanks for tuning in. That does it for today's episode of Own Your Retirement with our host, Albert Lalonde.
Take care, everyone.